Daniel. God's kingdom will not be destroyed, and his dominion will never end. We all love the story of Daniel in the lion's den. What courage and faith he had, what strong convictions he had. Likewise, we are moved by the powerful story about his friends, Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego, who are protected by God even though the Babylonian king, Nebuchadnezzar, angrily tries to kill them by throwing them into a fiery furnace. What a miraculous deliverance that was! This exciting book, however, is not really about the man Daniel, even though he was quite a remarkable individual. This book is about God. This book proclaims that no matter how bad things may appear on the surface, God is still sovereign and in control, carefully moving history forward to the culmination that he has planned and decreed. Who is Daniel? Daniel is quite a bit different from the others who proclaimed and wrote the prophetic books, for he is neither a priest nor a professional prophet. Daniel is an administrator, and he has a long career as a successful administrator working in the Babylonian government. While he was still a young man, Daniel was among the first group of exiles that the conquering Babylonians carried back to Babylonia. He was part of a smaller group of the young men from Jerusalem and Judah that the Babylonians brought back to train in preparation for service in their rapidly growing empire. What is the setting for Daniel? Daniel 1:1 dates the beginning of his story to the third year of Jehoiakim, 605 BC. The final date given in the book is tied to the third year of Cyrus, king of Persia, 537 BC. Thus, Daniel is a contemporary with Ezekiel and overlaps with the older Jeremiah by several years. Like Ezekiel, Daniel's prophetic ministry takes place in Babylon. He lives through the devastating and tumultuous times when the Babylonians destroy Jerusalem and carry off most of the surviving Israelites into captivity. What is at the heart of the book of Daniel? The book of Daniel is composed of two major units. Chapters 1 through 6 contain stories about Daniel and his friends, standing strong for their faith. The major theme in this unit, however, focuses on God, demonstrating that God is more powerful than the kings of Babylon and Persia. The second half of the book, Daniel 7 through 12, broadens the view to encompass God's great plan for the future, especially in regard to humanity's world empires in contrast to the establishment of God's world empire. The message of the book is that even in difficult times when it appears that forces hostile to God are dominating, God wants his people to live faithfully, trusting in him and in his promise that he alone controls world history and that he will bring about the glorious kingdom all in due time. Thus, the book of Daniel can be broken down into the following sections. God is more powerful than the monarchs of Babylon and Persia. Chapters 1, verses 1 through 6, and chapter 6, all the way through 28. All the encompassing verses between chapters 1 through chapter 6. Daniel and his friends in the Babylonian University, Daniel chapter 1, verse 1 through 21. King Nebuchadnezzar's dream about four world empires, chapter 2, verses 1 through 49. Can Nebuchadnezzar kill God's servants? The fiery furnace, chapter 3, verses 1 through 30. Nebuchadnezzar humbled by God, Daniel chapter 4, verses 1 through 37. Handwriting on the wall, Babylon falls to the Persians, chapter 5, verses 1 through 31. Daniel in the lion's den, chapter 6, verses 1 through 28. World kingdoms and God's plan for the future, chapter 7, verses 1 through 12. All the way through chapter 12, verse 13. The Ancient of Days and the Beast with 10 horns, chapter 7, verses 1 through 28. Daniel's vision of a ram and a goat, chapter 8, verses 1 through 27. Daniel's prayer and the 77s, chapter 9, verses 1 through 27. And Daniel's final vision, Daniel chapter 10, verse 1 through Daniel chapter 12, verse 13. What makes the book of Daniel interesting and unique? This book contains several riveting stories. The fiery furnace, the lion's den, about how Daniel and his three friends remain faithful to God and thus are protected by God. Daniel's chapters 1 through chapter 6. King Nebuchadnezzar, Daniel chapter 2, and Daniel chapter 7, both have startling and symbolic visions portraying four world empires. Daniel sees a vision of the Ancient of Days, God seated on his throne, holding court. Chapter 7, verses 9 through 10. Daniel sees a vision of one like a son of man coming with the clouds of heaven, an image that the New Testament connects to Christ. Matthew 24, 30 through 31. Mark chapter 13, 26 through 27. Luke chapter 21, verses 27 through 28. Revelations chapter 1, verse 7. And Revelations chapters 12 through 18. Daniel's visions pertain to the near future, events that happen prior to Christ, as well as to the far future, events that apparently are yet to come. The book of Daniel is written in two languages. Daniel 1, verses 1 through 2, and all the way to chapter 2, verse 4a is in Hebrew. Then chapters 2, verse 4 through chapter 7, verse 28 is in Aramaic, the language of the Babylonians. And chapter 8, verse 1 through chapter 12, verse 13 is in Hebrew again. What is Daniel's message? God is more powerful than the monarchs of Babylon and Persia. Chapters 1 through chapter 6, verse 28. Daniel and his friends are in the Babylonian University. Daniel chapter 1, verses 1 through 21. Daniel and his 3 friends are taken from Judah to Babylonia, given new Babylonian names, and placed in a Babylonian educational institution to be trained for service in the Babylonian government. Although they are away from home and under strong pressure to abandon their religious identity, all 4 of these men remain faithful to God and even refuse to eat unclean foods, probably food that had been offered to idols. God honors their faith and gives them extraordinary knowledge and skill, thus allowing them to excel and prosper in Babylon. King Nebuchadnezzar's dream about 4 world empires, chapter 2, verses 1 through 49. Nebuchadnezzar, king of the Babylonians, has a troubling dream that no one but Daniel is able to interpret. The dream is of a large statue comprising several different materials. The statue, Daniel explains, represents 4 world empires, starting with the current Babylonian Empire. In chapter 7, Daniel also has a vision representing 4 world empires. See the discussion coming up. The main point is that the powerful Babylonian Empire, overwhelming as it appears, will not last, but will be replaced with successive empires that diminish in glory, finally to be destroyed by God and replaced with his kingdom. Can Nebuchadnezzar kill God's servants? The fiery furnace, Daniel chapter 3, verses 1 through 30. Many of us are familiar with the story, but perhaps we haven't stopped to ask what it really means within the context of Daniel. Nebuchadnezzar builds a huge new golden statue. Compare this to the vision in chapter 2, and then orders everyone to bow down and worship the statue. Daniel's 3 friends refuse to obey. Infuriated by their obstinacy, the king throws them into a burning furnace, probably a kiln, for manufacturing ceramic glazed bricks, for which Babylon was famous. Yet the fire does not kill the young men, and when the king looks into the fire, he sees not 3, but 4 men walking around in the fire. The 4th is apparently either an angel of the Lord or the Lord himself. This is not only a story about how God honors the faith of these young men, but it is also a statement to the Hebrew exiles. Nebuchadnezzar, the king who destroyed Jerusalem and who killed thousands of her inhabitants, is unable to kill these 3 Hebrew men, even though they are in Babylon, his own backyard. God is more powerful than Nebuchadnezzar and the Babylonians, even though Jerusalem lies in ruins. Nebuchadnezzar humbled by God. Chapter 4, verses 1 through 37. Nebuchadnezzar has a dream about a tree that is cut down. Daniel reluctantly informs the king that the vision refers to the king himself, who will be driven away from people and will live like an animal until he humbles himself and recognizes the power of sovereignty of God. The dream comes true, and Nebuchadnezzar lives like an animal until he humbly acknowledges the power of God, who then restores him to his throne. The 4 kingdoms of Daniel. In Daniel 2, King Nebuchadnezzar has a troubling dream about a large statue composed of different materials. Daniel describes and interprets the dream for him, explaining that the statue represents 4 kingdoms. In Daniel 7, Daniel himself is given a vision in a dream that involves 4 beasts. An angel explains to Daniel that the 4 great beasts in 4 kingdoms that will rise from the earth. Chapter 7, verse 17. Most scholars conclude that the 2 visions, Nebuchadnezzar's and Daniel's, describe the same 4 kingdoms. But which kingdoms are these? The first one is easy to identify because Daniel tells us it is the Babylonian kingdom. After that, things are trickier, and 3 different views of these kingdoms are possible. The following chart represents a comparison of the 2 most popular views, a comparison of the 2 major traditional views of Daniel 2 and 7. The man in Daniel 2. Gold head, silver chest, arms, bronze belly, thighs, clay, and iron feet. Beast in Daniel 7. The lion, bear, leopard with 4 heads, and a 4th beast. Traditional evangelical view. Babylon, Medo-Persia, Greece with Alexander the Great, Rome, the revived Roman Empire. Alternate view, Babylon/Assyria, Media, Persia, and Greece. A third option for understanding the statue and the beast is to view all 4 kingdoms as symbolic, representing kingdoms of the world in general. In this view, 4 represents north, south, east, and west, or all the kingdoms of the world. The point would be that evil human kingdoms will succeed one another throughout history until God intervenes at the climax of history to establish his ultimate kingdom. In addition, there are numerous similarities between the boastful horn of Daniel's 4th beast in Daniel 7 and the beast/Antichrist in Revelation chapter 13, thus connecting the vision of Daniel 7 to the future events in Revelation 13. At the end of the 20th century, some writers speculated that the European Union fulfilled the 10-horned beast prophecy as a revival of the Roman Empire, but since membership in the European Union has swelled beyond 10 members to include 27 members, the likelihood that it represents a 10-horned beast seems remote. Likewise, attempts to connect the United Nations with Daniel's prophecy have not been convincing. Handwriting on the wall. Babylon falls to the Persians. Daniel chapter 5, verses 1 through 31. Time has passed. Nebuchadnezzar has died, and Daniel is an old man. The current Babylonian king, Nabonidus, has moved to Arabia, and his son and co-regent, Belshazzar, now reigns over Babylon. During a banquet, while the king and the people are drinking wine from cups, the Babylonians had looted from the temple in Jerusalem. A hand appears and writes on the wall. Once again, only Daniel is able to interpret this sign and decipher the writing, which announces the end of the Babylonian Empire. In fact, the Medes and the Persians capture Babylon that very night. Daniel in the lion's den. Daniel chapter 6, verses 1 through 28. In Daniel 5, the Medes and the Persians overrun the Babylonians in Daniel 6, then takes place during the time of Persian Median rule. The king in this chapter is called Darius, a very common name among the Persians. And many scholars think that this is the same king as Cyrus the Great, or perhaps general appointed by Cyrus. Once again, Daniel is pressured to compromise his faith in God, and because he refuses to cease praying to God, Daniel is sentenced to death and thrown into a den of lions. God, however, protects Daniel and keeps the lions from killing him. Just as the Babylonian kings had been forced to recognize the power of Daniel's God, so now the Persian king is forced to make the same acknowledgement. Indeed, the Persian king himself summarizes the point of Daniel chapters 1 through chapter 6 when he declares, "For he, the God of Daniel, is the living God, and he endures forever. His kingdom will not be destroyed. His dominion will never end." Daniel chapter 6, verse 26. World Kingdoms and God's Plan for the Future. Chapter 7, verse 1 through chapter 12, verse 13. The Ancient of Days and the Beast with 10 horns. Daniel chapter 7, verses 1 through 28. Back in chapter 2, Nebuchadnezzar had a dream of a statue made of different materials, which, as Daniel explained, represented 4 world kingdoms. Here in chapter 7, verses 1 through verses 8, Daniel, now a much older man, has a vision of 4 great beasts, which also represent 4 world kingdoms, apparently the same 4 kingdoms. Daniel sees a lion with the wings of an eagle, a bear with 3 ribs in his mouth, a leopard with 4 heads and 4 wings, and then a terrible 4th beast, which Daniel describes as being very different from the others, having iron teeth and 10 horns, 3 of which are uprooted and replaced with a new little horn, characterized by boastfulness. Next, Daniel sees a vision of God himself coming to judge the terrible 4th beast from Daniel chapter 7. He describes God as the Ancient of Days, clothed in white, seated on a fiery throne, attended by an unaccountable multitude of attendants. The boastful horn is destroyed, and then one like a son of man comes with the clouds, and the Ancient of Days establishes his kingdom as an everlasting kingdom. In Daniel's vision, the Son of Man is given authority, glory, and sovereign power, and all peoples, nations, and men of every language worship him. Daniel is then given an explanation of his vision. Chapter 7, verse 15 through 27. The 4 beasts represent kingdoms, with the 4th kingdom, the 10-horned beast, described as a very different kind of kingdom. The 10 horns are 10 kings, and the little horn is also a king, who replaces 3 of the 10. He will speak against God and oppress God's people, but God will judge him and then establish God's kingdom. Daniel's vision of a ram and a goat. Daniel chapter 8, verses 1 through 27. Daniel sees a vision of a powerful ram that is then defeated by a goat. One of the horns of the goat breaks off and is replaced with 4 horns. Then the angel Gabriel explains the vision to Daniel, clearly identifying the ram as the Medes and the Persians, who ruled during the latter years of Daniel's life. The goat, Gabriel explains, represents Greece. Historically, it is Alexander the Great who fulfills this prophecy by overrunning the Medo-Persian Empire and attempting to install Greek culture in every place he conquers. Alexander, however, dies while still young, and his 4 generals divide his empire, thus fulfilling the 4 horns prophecy in Daniel 8. Daniel's prayer and the 77. Daniel chapter 9, verses 1 through 27. Daniel recalls that the prophet Jeremiah had predicted that the desolation of Jerusalem would last 70 years. Daniel realizes the 70-year period will end soon, and he prays to God about the restoration of Jerusalem, while also confessing Israel's sin and rebellion. Gabriel then comes to Daniel and gives him a complicated apocalyptic expansion on the 70 years mentioned by Jeremiah. Gabriel refers to 77s, chapter 9, verse 24, which probably is a reference to 490 years, or perhaps a reference to a long but complete period of time. Scholars are divided on how to understand chapters 9, verses 25 through 27. Some connect this prophecy to the terrible activities carried out by a king named Antiochus IV Epiphanes, who desecrated the temple in Jerusalem in 167 BC. Other scholars believe that Daniel chapter 9, verses 25 through 27 refers to the activities of the future Antichrist described in the New Testament. Another possibility is that Antiochus Epiphanes fulfills the prophecy in a limited sense, with the Antichrist fulfilling the prophecy in a final ultimate sense. We have a picture above of a drinking vessel called a rhyton from the Persian era. The ram in the vision of Daniel 8 represented the Medes and the Persians. Daniel's final vision. Daniel chapter 10, verses 1 through Daniel chapter 12, verse 13. Chapter 10 opens with Daniel mourning over a vision he saw about a terrible great war. An angelic figure appears to Daniel and explains that he had attempted to come earlier, but was delayed by opposition from the prince of the Persian kingdom until Michael, one of the chief princes, that is an archangel, helped him. This interesting passage implies that there may be powerful territorial spiritual powers that oppose God and his people, a reality implied as well in other passages, Deuteronomy 32:8, Psalm 82, Ephesians 6:12, and Revelations 12:7. Throughout Daniel chapter 11, the angel continues to explain to him about numerous wars and conflicts. Most of what the angel describes actually takes place in Palestine a few hundred years later, during the 3rd and 2nd centuries BC. However, some of the verses in Daniel 11, such as chapter 11, verse 31, seems to refer both to the desecration of the temple carried out by Antiochus IV Epiphanes, 167 BC, as well as to a desecration carried out by a future antagonist, the Antichrist of the New Testament, an identification made clear by Matthew 24:15. Some scholars also note that Luke 21 appears to connect Daniel 11 to the destruction of Jerusalem by the Romans in AD 70. In the concluding chapter of the book, the angel who is explaining things to Daniel makes an amazing prediction. Everyone whose name is found written in the book will be delivered. Chapter 12, verse 1. The climactic deliverance, however, is no mere restoration to the land, but involves resurrection from the dead, a resurrection to eternal life. So what? Applying Daniel to our lives today. The courage and faith of Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego in the fiery furnace, and the steadfast faithfulness of Daniel in the lion's den still stands as models for us today. All these men refused to waver in their commitment to God. They remained totally obedient to God in spite of the unpleasant and seemingly overpowering circumstances that engulfed them. These stories encourage us to stand firm for our Lord, regardless of the pressure exerted on us by our culture or by unfortunate circumstances. These men did not compromise their faith, even at the risk of losing their lives. The challenge us to do likewise. Daniel's overall message has special relevance to us today as well. Daniel reminds us that God is sovereign and that his kingdom will ultimately triumph over all hostile world powers, a triumph that includes our resurrection from the dead. Our favorite verse in Daniel, Daniel chapter 12, verse 2. Multitudes who sleep in the dust of the earth will awake, some to everlasting life, others to shame and everlasting contempt.